Hello world, curses and madness be upon you all my friends. I am Euclidean Vision, the emotional support, here today to propose a further progression system for Overwatch 2's PVE, building off the talents we've seen so far and my own talent tree that you should go and check out in your own time, to bring you a new way to customize your future robo-slaying experience, weapon skin perks. As stated in my May talent tree video, which I'm going to keep plugging at Yugo, watch that when you can, the idea behind weapon skin perks as opposed to talents is to introduce a change in playstyle, rather than give you just a straight up buff, by limiting one area of your kit so as to give it a new function in another area, or change the way that you use that existing ability in itself. And so the one you see on screen now is the first one I came up with that sort of led me down this train of thought in the first place. Honeydew May, which removes your ability to freeze enemies, but leaves pools of sticky melon goop on the ground, allowing you to root more enemies than you would be able to freeze. This is again just sort of about like a change in playstyle, whereby here aiming anywhere but your enemies at first is going to actually be really advantageous, with the added range potential and like multi-target potential of the root, allowing you to mop up multiple foes with a collection of tasty freeze pops. These weapon skins would be equipped to a hero just as you would change skins now before you go into a mission, say, but the story mode especially would befit just changing the weapon skin so as to keep all the heroes' new core designs prevalent and keep up the feel of the story mode. So with that example out of the way, I'm sure someone out there is probably wondering how you would actually get these weapon skins in the game, because basing it directly off your in-game cosmetics as it stands would give old Overwatch players a huge advantage going into Overwatch 2, and that's unlikely to be Blizzard's MO, despite how much it would reward the loyal fans, something that they've said they want to do in a way. Carrying your stuff over is probably enough. So, my favourite idea thus far would be to make obtaining these skins some kind of like extra quest in themselves, either via completing like optional objectives for missions, or as special like loot drop enemies found within the missions themselves. An easier format would be just to offer them as mission rewards, and whether that's randomized or whether it's stated beforehand, and it seems that specific limitations or setups for hero missions specifically could also be a really good way to separate the tiers of weapon skins available to be earned beyond just choosing difficulty levels. And the worst way I think you could do it would be obviously to tie them to some form of loot box or shop system and make it utterly random. I'm also sort of unsure whether a trading system would be sensible or not as well, so that aspect of things is at least something to be properly determined and figured out as we go ahead, so as to benefit everybody who's playing Overwatch 2 equally and fairly. So, on to the actual meat and bones of the video, my proposals for May's weapon skin perks, based on her existing cosmetic line. And to start, we've got one you could apply to every hero, the default skin. At first I feel the default skin for any hero shouldn't do anything, but can be upgraded through some form of PVE points, sort of like competitive points, into a gold version that maybe interacts with talents directly. For example, something like remove a currently equipped talent in order to equip two from the same row, something like that. If you wanted it to be like a super worthy investment, you could make it just equip an extra talent on this hero. Especially as it has its like own acquisition mechanic here with these PVE points, which are making analogous to competitive points. However, at that point, it's likely just sort of too powerful, and so will be the only sought after weapon skin, despite its like particularly limited grind, so some kind of limitation in how it applies to talents would be necessary in my mind, really. So ultimately, that's how I see the default and golden guns working for basically every hero across the board. So, the default does nothing. The golden gun interacts with talents directly. I think would be a really cool way to do that. But we'll now move on to the more specific ideas with May's actual skins, and we're going to start with the rares, move all the way up to the legendaries. But again, the basic premise of how these rare ones work can sort of be applied to all heroes with these 4 colour variants. Simple boosts in one area of the kit, and simple reductions in another. So starting with Chrysanthemum, the yellow variant, as yellow is usually synonymous with healing, we'll make it that Ice Block lasts longer, so it heals you more, and therefore we got to take something away, so Ice Wall lasts less time as well. Then on to Heliotrope, the pink one, we'll just make this the opposite. Ice Wall lasts longer, and Ice Block lasts less time. And so on to Persimmon, the orange one. Orange feels like fire to me, so we'll go with Freeze does more damage, and Icicles deal less. And then with Jade, which reminds me of a gem, hard icicles, gems, things like that. Icicles deal more damage, and freezing deals less damage. Nice and simple, but it at least allows you to focus into the area of your kit that you prefer. If you're really good with the icicle headshots and you don't really freeze enemies much as Mei, then you can go with the Jade colour variant, and that will just sort of suit your playstyle. It just sort of allows you to highlight how you play the character a bit more, which even with simple things like this, I think this will help you feel a bit more like the character you're trying to play. So, onto the epic skins, starting with Earthen, and I'm going to use the influences of the skins to design what all of these perks are. So Earthen, instead of freezing people and shooting icicles, it shoots rocks. There's no freezing, but over the same amount of ticks, the primary fire will build to a stun, and the icicles, or the rocks, the alternate fire, will also stun if you land headshots or crit shots. So if you see, again, that's just a change to the playstyle. You'll still be using both elements in a sort of familiar way, but for slightly different functions. And so on to Snowplum. I had sort of two options for this. I will go with the initial one that I had, is that freezing takes longer, but once you freeze an enemy, they will emit a small heal over time. Snowplum just sort of made me think of flowers and the spring and healing, things like that. You could have it something a bit different. My other option was, when you go into Ice Block turns into a plum flower, which pacifies nearby enemies, making them stop shooting, but it either heals you less than normal or it doesn't heal you at all. So it changes sort of the purpose that you use Ice Block for, if that makes sense. So then moving on to Pumpkin, one that I definitely think should change Ice Block. Ice Block turns into a pumpkin, scaring away enemies, so the fear status, which we can do to PvE enemies. They don't care about being feared. That's something I don't think would work in PvP. And obviously the caveat to the pumpkin skin turning into a pumpkin, I think would be, again, Ice Block heals you less or not at all. Then on to Zhongguo, I think that's how you pronounce it, sorry if I butchered that, which, hey, it's a Chinese national skin, it's got a nice dragon aesthetic going on. Let's make it a proper Dragon's Breath gun. Primary fire doesn't freeze, but sets enemies on fire. So you can actually play Mei like the pyro that you've always wanted to play her as. And so then moving on to the legendary skins. As I mentioned Honeydew before, I'll just reiterate how that works so you can maybe see how it fits alongside the other ones. Again, freezing doesn't work, but the goop puddles that are left on the floor will slow enemies over a short period of time down to 50%. Once they are slowed to that 50% mark, they will be rooted, which means they're slowed to 100%, if that makes sense. But they will obviously still be able to fire. But the puddles that are left on the ground will last for a certain duration, which means that you can have more enemies rooted than you would probably be able to have frozen, if that makes sense. So then on to Mei. Oh, that sounds so dumb to say. Ice Block turns into a snowman, as it already does, but this snowman will deal melee damage with its stick arms to nearby enemies, and it'll probably just have a shorter duration if we were to make it like Pumpkin and Snowplum, if those two are to heal less as opposed to not healing at all. Then on to Beekeeper. My two options are a wider freeze cone but a reduced range, so it makes Mei's ice gun a bit more like the gas guns they use at apiaries, or in practice a bit more like Winston's Tesla cannon. Or my other option is that the primary fire doesn't freeze, but it applies a poison damage over time effect, like being stung with bees to enemies hit. So, onto some of the more like pairs of skins. Pajame, if we're looking at the Rise and Shine short. Pajame freezes enemies more slowly as it's based on a teacup, but it does just more damage. So it's almost like hitting someone with scalding, freezing water, if that makes any sense. Science, it'll work, it's fine. On to Eco Point Mei. Enemies killed while frozen leave behind whipped cream health pickups. I think this would be really good for turning you into sort of like a support version of Mei, especially if you're relying heavily on your freezing in the first place. Then on to the Firefighter pair, Rescue Mei. Rescue Mei's primary doesn't freeze, but just does damage as normal, and spraying allies will heal them and cleanse them of any debuffs or damage over time, things like poison or fire, which I hope that they allow the enemy units to be able to do as well if we're building up to so many of our characters being able to use things like that as well. And then onto Firefighter. Again, primary doesn't freeze, but this one is much more like actually using a fire hose. The primary fire has knockback per tick as opposed to freezing. So there you can make a CC heavy Mei if you want to do that. On to the Yeti ones. Yeti Hunter. Freeze doesn't pierce, but freezes faster. Kind of a nice and simple one, but it'll just make you a bit more reliant on singling out individual targets. But if you've only got one target to get to, you're a winner. Yeah? Abominable. Blizzard no longer freezes. I had to come up with a Blizzard one. Blizzard no longer freezes, but Snowball shoots many icicles in an area of effect. So Snowball basically becomes a throwable Death Blossom, shooting icicles at everyone. I think that'd be really funny to see, and it'd just be a bit of a change from how you'd use Blizzard normally. If you're coming up like against a boss enemy with a massive ton of health in one of the hero missions, say, and Mei's freeze either doesn't affect it or it doesn't actually benefit you as much in the long run, then you could go with something like this to just sink damage into something like that, if that makes any sense. And finally, on to the legendary Chinese skins. Shang'e, the Ice Wall, insta-freezes enemies in an area of effect, but does not leave behind a wall. So if you want to focus a bit more on CC than like the tanking aspects of Mei, that's a bit of a skin for you. Then Luna, Ice Block heals nearby allies, but not Mei. I think that one is the one that you'd have it not heal Mei, especially if it just outright heals nearby allies. And last but not least, Jiangshi, enemies killed by the freeze beam become temporary zombie turrets, firing upon what were once their allies. The caveat I've made for this is that Mei's primary damage is incredibly low, so it will be incredibly difficult to get the final blow on an enemy with the freeze beam. But if you get really good about applying it at the right times, in the right places, then you can have tons of zombie turrets killing all your enemies for you. So I hope those all made sense to start off with, and that you can see how I was trying to apply the idea of a reduction in one area of the kit to allow you to do more with another certain area of your kit, or change how a certain area works altogether. And if you've seen my talent tree for Mei, which again, go watch my video on that, you might be able to see how some of these weapons tie in with certain talents there. Any talents that involve the ice block could even well synergize with some of these ice block changes that you apply with a weapon skin. So choosing a weapon skin to fit your talent build can be like super important, and can be just like a nice, fun, different way to, one, still express yourself somehow within the story missions, and also to offer you just a little bit more of an interesting expansion on an already kind of expansive system. So, what do you think of my idea? Do you think that it's a sensible one to add into Overwatch 2? Do you reckon we should just purely focus on talents and just use those? And Blizzard have said that they want to do multiple progression systems in a way, so, you know, however that works, they could go down to the most basic things of armor and things like that just gives you slight stat changes and things like that. That'd be fine, but I don't think it needs to go that way. I think talents and weapon skin perks that interact with each other, I think that that's enough, essentially, to keep every character expansive but still cohesive. But hey, obviously I could always be wrong. That's not off the cards. So leave me your ideas for weapon skin perks down in the comments below. Tell me what your favourite skin is and what you think its perk should be. Let me know if any of my ideas you think would actually be workable in game. And let's hope that Blizzard, you know, he listens to us and maybe picks up on some of our ideas. Because it'd be nice to see some of these, I reckon. But with that, I've been Euclidean Vision, the emotional support. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy my ridiculous Overwatch nonsense. And hopefully I'll see you again very soon. Take care of yourselves, teammates. And may the glorious light of Best Girl shine within you. Bye-bye.